Right now, if you look over the Pacific, you would see something remarkable, something that should make anyone paying attention to the global economy take notice. It isn't a storm, and it isn't a fleet of warships preparing for battle. What stretches out of the port of Vancouver are long lines of cargo ships, miles long heading west toward Shanghai. For decades, these vessels carried some of the highest quality wheat in the world, flowing through North America to keep markets stable, prices predictable, and shelves stocked from Minneapolis all the way down to Miami. Today, that pattern has changed. The grain that once reliably nourished North America is sailing across the Pacific instead of across the continent. And this isn't just about wheat, it's a signal of a fundamental shift in global trade and economic power. Just a few days ago, the United States unveiled a new tariff strategy, ostensibly to protect American farmers. On paper, it seems simple. Slap a 25% tariff on Canadian grain, force Ottawa to the negotiating table, and secure American interests. It was classic leverage, an attempt to bend a neighbor to your will by threatening economic consequences. The logic was straightforward, at least in theory, but the reality of global markets is far more complex than any single government can control. Grain is a worldwide commodity. Canada isn't a cornered player. It has options, and they use them. Within 12 hours of the tariff announcement, Canada had reached out to China. What emerged was the Pacific Grain Security Pact, a deal that redirects roughly 40% of Canada's exportable wheat away from North America and into Chinese state reserves. This is not a small adjustment or a temporary diversion. This is a strategic realignment, a formal shift in supply chains that has long-term consequences. China secures food security at premium prices. Canada ensures guaranteed sales and stable revenue. The United States, largely bypassed. The consequences are immediate and measurable, and they will be felt in American homes, on grocery shelves, and throughout the Midwest for months to come. For 30 years, the United States and Canada have effectively functioned as one integrated agricultural system. Wheat from the Canadian prairies blended with American crops to produce high-quality flour. Processing plants relied on this consistency to feed cities across the continent. That integrated market kept prices stable, supply chains efficient, and jobs secure. Today, that system is fractured. Chicago wheat futures spiked nearly 12% in a single morning when the news of the pact hit traders. These spikes are not political, they are market responses to supply disruptions. American millers who rely on high-protein Canadian wheat are suddenly scrambling. The specific grades they need for baking, pasta production, and high-quality flour cannot be easily replaced with domestic crops. Meanwhile, the political response in Washington has been dramatic, loud, and reactive. Threats of sanctions, tweets in the middle of the night labeling Canada as very unfair, all miss a crucial point. The contracts are signed, the ships are sailing, and the decisions have already been executed. Words can't undo a deal when ships are en route, and rail cars, insurance policies, and terminals have been secured for months. Across the border, Canada has quietly executed a calculated strategy. By pivoting to China, they've locked in supply, created predictability, and secured leverage. The contrast between these approaches couldn't be clearer. One side reacts impulsively, publicly, and emotionally. The other side plans methodically, strategically, and quietly. While the United States is tweeting threats and making dramatic pronouncements, Canada is reshaping the global food supply chain to protect its own interests. This is a lesson in leadership. One leader seeks applause and media attention. The other seeks tangible results and long-term security. The implications extend far beyond grain prices. For American farmers, the effects are immediate. The fluid cross-border flow of grain is disrupted. American processing plants that relied on Canadian wheat now face shortages. Efficiency drops, production slows, and jobs in the Midwest are at risk. Communities in North Dakota, Montana, and other border states feel the consequences almost instantly. Farmers who vote for protectionist policies suddenly find themselves vulnerable, trapped between political rhetoric and market realities. Meanwhile, grocery stores across the United States will soon reflect these disruptions, with rising prices for flour, bread, pasta, and cereals. Beyond the immediate economic impact, there is a strategic shift underway. For decades, the U.S. has assumed centrality in global trade. Our markets, our currency, and our influence have been reinforced by our position at the center of supply chains. That assumption is being challenged. Canada's pivot demonstrates that alternatives exist. Supply chains can be redirected. Contracts can bypass the United States entirely. Markets are not obligated to bow to threats, no matter how loudly they are proclaimed on social media or in political speeches. The leadership styles at play here are instructive. One leader relies on bluster, ego, and impulsive threats. The other relies on contracts, foresight, and a clear understanding of supply and demand. Canada's approach secures not just immediate sales, but long-term strategic leverage. By diversifying partners and securing reliable buyers, Canada signals that dependence on the United States is no longer necessary. Meanwhile, American policymakers are left reacting to decisions that have already been made, scrambling to regain lost ground. Potential scenarios in the coming weeks are sobering. Escalation is one path. The United States might impose harsher tariffs, threaten a complete ban on Canadian agricultural products, or even consider closing borders. Such measures would devastate border state economies, disrupt supply chains, and trigger a domestic crisis in manufacturing and agriculture. A second path is a quiet retreat where concessions are offered in private negotiations to restore some supply. But the contracts with China are already in place, and much of the market share is lost. The third, and perhaps most consequential scenario, is global realignment. Other nations observing Canada's success may choose to follow suit, forming bilateral agreements that exclude the U.S., gradually eroding American influence in global trade. The lesson is clear. Leverage in the global economy comes from reliability, foresight, and strategic planning, not from threats and impulsive actions. Fear only works when options are limited. Once countries have alternatives, the leverage shifts. Canada has created options and in doing so has shifted power in its favor. The U.S., by contrast, finds itself constrained, reacting rather than leading. These shifts are not abstract, they are tangible and immediate. Ships are leaving Vancouver for Shanghai, Chicago traders are adjusting to new supply realities, and American millers are scrambling for alternative sources. Prices on grocery shelves will reflect these disruptions. Jobs, supply chains, and entire industries are affected, and the world is taking notice. Europe, Latin America, and other major players are observing how trade can bypass traditional American dominance. Canada's actions serve as a blueprint for others, showing that strategic diversification can work even against a historically dominant neighbor. At its core, this is not just a trade story, it's a story of leadership, planning, and global strategy. One side seeks applause, threats, and attention. The other side seeks results, contracts, and leverage. The difference is profound. One leader reacts, the other plans. One focuses on optics, the other on outcomes. The United States may still be a massive market, but reliability, trust, and predictability are just as important as size. And when those qualities are absent, even the largest player can be sidelined. We are entering a new era. For consumers, farmers, and policymakers alike, the rules are changing. North American markets are no longer guaranteed. Supply chains can be rerouted, and national influence can shift quietly but decisively. The wheat fields of Saskatchewan, thousands of miles from Washington, now have the power to reshape global markets. The cost of unpredictability, impulsiveness, and overconfidence is becoming visible in real time. In the coming months, the impact will be felt on dinner tables, in grocery bills, and in the stability of American agriculture. Jobs may be at risk, prices will likely rise, and the assumption that the U.S. sits at the center of global trade is being challenged. Canada's pivot to China demonstrates that alternatives exist and that strategic planning can outmaneuver threats, tweets, and tariffs. The world is watching, and the message is clear. Leverage comes from planning, contracts, and options, not from intimidation or rhetoric. This week marks a turning point. The decisions made in Ottawa, executed with precision, are influencing prices, supply chains, and economic power thousands of miles away in the United States. The ships are sailing west, the markets are adjusting, and the balance of influence is subtly but decisively shifting. Leadership, foresight, and strategy have won over threats and bluster. And as this story unfolds, the lesson is inescapable. In the modern global economy, the ability to plan, execute, and diversify determines who holds power, not who shouts the loudest.